Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
I'm Annie MacArthur, and I accidentally summoned a demon. By life is strange, me too. She wanted you to have it. It was her most prized possession. I stared down at the old brass pendant in my palm, the only thing my great-grandmother had left in her will to anyone. I had no idea how much death and destruction would follow in the wake of that pendant. I'd get my first taste that very afternoon, but for the moment, I just stared at it, nonplussed. It was completely ordinary, heavy and brass with a dull blue stone in the middle. "Thanks," I said. My great-aunt's venerable face crinkled into a sad smile, and her gray eyes misted with tears. She patted my head, then turned to socialize with the other grief-stricken funeral-goers. Suddenly a hand clamped down on my shoulder from behind. I winced, but did not shrink beneath the familiar pain. "You rude little brat," my mother hissed, quiet enough so that only I could hear. "Your great-aunt Susan gives you a beautiful gift, and all you can say is thanks." She squeezed harder, and I wilted a little. "What will you say next time?" she hissed. "Thank you," I said through gritted teeth. "Thank you what?" "Thank you, ma'am." "That's right," my mother said, her grip relaxing a little. "The rest of the family already thinks we're trash because your drunk father. You will not give them any other excuses to look down on us." It stung when she mentioned my father. She knew that, and would use it to punish me whenever I did something wrong. Her favorite adage was that the best thing my father ever did in his life was dying. Her grip on my shoulder relaxed, but only because my rich Uncle Jared had just come in. My mother abandoned me to go fawn over him. Tonight I was sure she would complain to me about how he just wouldn't die fast enough so they could divvy up his estate. I glanced down at the pendant, the only jewelry I owned. It seemed to be radiating a strange warmth. I took it to my room to try it on. I stood in front of the wood-framed oval mirror and draped the pendant around my neck. For the first time in a long time, I liked the way it looked. I smiled. Then I screamed. It was a soundless scream, choked with terror. The mirror and the desk beneath it had disappeared, crushed beneath the immense bulk of a horrifying monster. It was easily 8 feet tall, hunched over, and had colossal, leathery black wings like a bat, and a huge, hairy belly on which it rested its clawed hands. It had 2-foot-long teeth on top of its mouth, and 2 smaller ones on the bottom. Its tongue lolled lazily to one side. "Who are you?" it asked. Its voice was surprisingly rich, deep, gentlemanlike. "I'm Annie," I said. "Oh, nice to meet you, Annie," he said. "My name is Abaddon. I am from the Abyss." "You're from the—" But I didn't finish. A rush of air hit me from behind as the door to my room swung open. Abaddon was no longer there, only the crushed rubble of what was once my study desk. The door closed, and I turned to face my mother. Her face was pale, her lips compressed into a thin white line, and her eyes bulging as she stared at the ruins of my study desk. "You rotten little girl," she spat, staring not at me but through me. "You're lucky that the house is full of relatives, or I'd beat you within an inch of your life." She began stalking towards me, her hand reaching out and found my throat. She squeezed. "For now," she said, "your punishment will have to be more quiet." Her grip squeezed tighter and tighter, and darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision. My lungs burned for air. Purple stars danced in my eyes. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there was Abaddon, hunched behind my mother. Almost lazily, he reached out with a clawed hand, seizing her by the head and waist. Before she had a chance to scream, Abaddon had ripped off her head and dropped it into his open mouth. With a few crunching bites and a swallow, it was gone. He made short work of the rest of her, then patted his belly and let out a light belch. "I'm terribly sorry about that," he said, staring down at my blood-stained floor. "I'm quite the messy eater." I tried to reply, but my voice refused to cooperate. Abaddon looked around the room and gave the air a couple of sniffs. "Say," he said, "is Lachesis here? I don't smell her." "Lachesis?" "Lachesis of the Morai. She measures the threads of fate," said Abaddon. "She lived in your grandmother's pearl earrings." He gave the air a few more sniffs. "I can smell her," he said, "but she's very far away." He reached down and took my hand in his gigantic claws and gave a gentle smile. "Come on," he said. "Let's go get her." Something about the warmth of his touch reassured me, and strangely I found myself smiling back. "Okay," I said, and just like that I set off on a journey that would forever change me. My name is Annie MacArthur, and I'm a demon hunter. Part 2. The air up here was cold and thin, and it stung as it whipped past my face. My fingers curled tightly in Abaddon's fur. His flight was breakneck and relentless, with sudden dives below the clouds, steep climbs into the sun, and sharp changes in the direction with no warning. It was the most wonderful terror I had ever felt. We hadn't snuck around to see what had happened at the funeral, but instead we were on our way to a little town in the Greek countryside, where Abaddon said he could smell Lachesis. It seemed almost no time at all before we were gently alighting in a wide field of grass at the base of a large steep hill. Perched atop the hill was a mansion, colossal and old. It broke out of the top of the landscape like a tooth that had blackened with rot. I slipped, climbing off Abaddon's back, falling hard on my rear end, but he hardly seemed to notice. He was sniffing the air. "There's something very wrong here," he said. I pushed myself up and did my best to brush the grass off my pants. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Lachesis isn't here?" Abaddon shook his head. "She is," he said. "I can smell her, but she smells weak. And there's something else, too." "Another demon?" "I don't know," said Abaddon. "It smells like a demon, but even more it smells like death. We should tread very carefully here." He saw the look on my face and gave me a gentle pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry, little Annie," he said. "Nothing will hurt you while I'm here. Besides, Lachesis and I are old friends. She should be glad to see me." My confidence was reinforced, if only by a little, and we started the long trek up the hill. As we walked, the atmosphere grew heavy. The air grew thick and hard to breathe, and the hill seemed to grow steeper and steeper. We were both puffing and out of breath when we reached the front door. We were surprised to find it open. "Something smells rotten here," said Abaddon. "Maybe we should go." I agreed, but something about the house seemed to pull at a place inside me I hadn't known existed. I stepped over the threshold and turned to see if Abaddon had followed, but he was nowhere to be seen. "I'm here," said his voice, "inside the necklace. If you need me, I will come." The entranceway was a huge foyer with vaulted ceilings supported by marble pillars. Huge, colorful tapestries lined the walls. They depicted great feasts with huge courses of lamb and roast pig, piles of mashed potatoes, and golden jugs of wine carried by naked women that spilled over as they walked. They shimmered with an unnatural light, and I found myself drawn to them, absent-mindedly tracing my finger over the smooth, silken cloth as I walked. I thought I could hear Abaddon's voice, but it was like an echo in the distance. I could not make out what it said. I came to a huge room with a magnificent marble sculpture and a huge crystal chandelier that caught and scattered the light into a million shards of rainbow. At the end of the great hall was the largest, most magnificent tapestry yet. It showed a scene of battle between an army of centaurs with bare, muscular chests, and men clad in magnificent golden armor. Above it all, on a familiar-looking hilltop, a woman sat on a silver throne, stringing a loom. Her left hand wielded a pair of black scissors. She reached out to touch the tapestry, and my hand melted through, sending out ripples like waves in a pond. I walked forward through the tapestry and the wall behind, into a throne room lit by 1,000 guttering candles. At the end of the throne room sat a woman, high-cheeked and noble-looking, with a huge mane of silver-gold hair that reminded me of a lion. Next to her sat a huge loom, and on her lap a large pair of black scissors. Adorning her ears, 2 huge pearl earrings. "Welcome," she said. Her voice broke my trance, and Abaddon appeared beside me. The woman smiled and drew a long silver string up from her lap. She ran it through her fingers, then suddenly pulled it taut. It felt like someone kicked me in the chest. I collapsed to the floor, breathless. Abaddon lunged at her, but collapsed halfway, tumbling head over heels and skidding to a stop. I saw that the woman had picked up a long black string. As she twisted and pulled at it, Abaddon writhed helplessly on the floor. I pushed myself up onto shaking legs. The woman smirked at me. "You first," she said. She dropped Abaddon's string and picked up the silver string. My string with her other hand as she picked up the black scissors and brought them to a close around my string. There was a bright flash of white light and a sound like cloth ripping. I blinked away the spots in my vision to see the woman's face, aghast. My string dangled in her hand, and the scissors lay broken on her lap. "What?" Her mouth hung open as she stared at me. "What are you?" Before I could answer, Abaddon had bound to his feet. He was almost to the throne when there was a flash of silver light, and he was thrown backward. Between him and the throne stood a tall, blonde woman. She was pale and thin, and was draped in a flowing white robe. Her hair was jet black. Her eyes were huge puddles of pale blue that bore a vacant expression. She held a long, thin sword at her side. She swung it at Abaddon's head, but the sword swished as it cut through only air. Abaddon had vanished. Just as quickly a black fissure opened beneath the woman's feet, and 1,000 shadowy hands reached out and seized her by the legs, dragging her into the floor. She hacked at two of them with the sword, and they dissolved with a hiss of acrid smoke. But more and more sprouted out of the floor. They swallowed her in a writhing mass of shadow and dragged her into the abyss. The fissure closed, and Abaddon reappeared at my side. The woman in the throne stared at us, her expression a blend of shock and wild anger. She stood up and then fell back down, catching herself with one hand. Her glorious mane of golden blonde hair turned gray, falling out in huge tufts. Her cheeks sunk in and shriveled up, taking on a milky, unhealthy pallor. Her entire body grew smaller and collapsed on itself, and she fell down into a pile of dust and bones. Without latches, she could no longer keep her thread from unraveling, said Abaddon. I looked at him. Where is Lachesis? I said. Did you kill her? Abaddon shook his head. He waved his hand and the fissure opened in the floor again. This time the hands emerged bearing the white-robed woman. They pushed her gently to her feet and retreated back into the abyss. Hello, the woman said. My name is Lachesis. We sat around a large mahogany table. The fireplace's reflection shimmered in the polished surface. Lachesis stared into the flames. Her face looked worn and old. I was always the weakest, she said. She spoke in a soft voice. I almost couldn't hear her. My sisters, they fought her. They resisted. And so she killed them and took their power for her own. But I was weak enough to be her puppet. That's why I'm alive. Weakness. Abaddon stretched out a wing and cloaked it around her shoulders. It was not your fault, he said. Lilith was a powerful sorceress. Many have fallen under her spell. No more, said Lachesis. Thanks to you. Abaddon frowned. Do you know what she was doing in that house? He asked. Those tapestries, they were... His voice trailed off. Yes, Lachesis said. All threads that she cut short. But why? Lachesis shook her head. I don't know, but the tapestries are part of something else. I know that much. Abaddon's eyebrows knit together as he scratched his chin. I think it's time we go see Hecate, he said. Lachesis nodded. I agree. So quoth this raven. My darlings, if you like this, please, 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 let Life is Strange and Me Too know that you would like more of this, because they're not sure they're going to continue. And you know this is right up my street with all the mythology. Thank you, my darlings. I hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. And I'm so glad you came to listen. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren, and Laura. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.